What if the janitor everyone dismisses, the one they mock for his stained uniform and weary eyes, is the most dangerous man in the city? What if the single dad struggling to make rent is the one person you should never, ever cross? Ethan pushed his mop across the gleaming lobby floor, the rhythmic slosh of soapy water a familiar, monotonous soundtrack to his life. Each swipe was an act of forgetting, an attempt to scrub away the man he used to be. But ghosts have a way of clinging to the shadows. "Hey, Daddy Daycare." Garrett's sneering voice cut through the quiet hum of the building. As the shift supervisor, Garrett considered it his personal mission to make Ethan's life a living hell. Late again. What was it this time? Did little Owen need his diaper changed? Laughter trickled from a few other employees loitering by the security desk. Ethan's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. He focused on a stubborn scuff mark, his knuckles white on the handle of the mop. "My son had a fever," he said, his voice low and even. "I had to wait for the sitter." Garrett stepped closer, his cheap cologne an assault on the senses. "Excuses, always excuses. You know, a real man would have a wife to handle that stuff. But I guess no woman would stick with a loser who cleans toilets for a living." The words were meant to sting, and they did, but not for the reasons Garrett thought. They were a bitter reminder of the life he'd lost, of the woman who had been his anchor, and of the promise he'd made to their son to keep him safe at any cost. He felt a gaze on him from across the lobby and glanced up. Serafina, a senior manager from the consulting firm on the 5th floor, was watching. Her expression wasn't one of mockery, but of a deep, uncomfortable pity that was almost worse. She gave him a small, apologetic smile before turning away, her heels clicking smartly on the marble he had just polished. Ethan finished his shift under Garrett's smug supervision, the humiliation coiling in his gut like a cold snake. He clocked out, the meager sum on his payslip a testament to his new, invisible life. The city air was thick with rain as he stepped outside, pulling the thin collar of his jacket tighter. All he wanted was to get home to Owen, to see his son's bright, trusting smile and remember what he was fighting for. But as he rounded the corner, a figure stumbled out of the alley, a desperate specter in the downpour. A woman, her hair plastered to her face and her clothes soaked through, grabbed his arm. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it stole his breath. "Please," she gasped, her voice raw with panic. "You have to help me." People streamed past them, umbrellas like shields, their faces averted from the unpleasantness of her desperation. But Ethan stopped. He always stopped. It was a reflex he couldn't unlearn, a piece of the old him that refused to be scrubbed away. He looked into her frantic eyes and saw more than just a homeless woman, he saw the precipice of a parent's worst nightmare. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain. Her grip on his arm tightened, her knuckles bone-white. She choked on a sob, her entire body shaking. "They have my son," she cried, the words ripped from her soul. "They took him." The world around Ethan seemed to fall silent. The rain, the traffic, the city's indifferent hum, it all faded away, replaced by the primal scream of a mother's fear. And in that moment, the janitor began to disappear, and something far older, far more lethal, began to stir in his place. Ethan led the woman, whose name was Nadia, into the sterile warmth of a 24-hour coffee shop. He bought her a hot tea, his calloused hands wrapping around the cup to warm his own frozen fingers. He listened as her story tumbled out between shuddering breaths. She owed money, a stupid, desperate loan from a predator named Rico who ruled the city's underbelly with an iron fist. She had missed a payment, and Rico's men had come to her makeshift shelter that afternoon. They had taken her 7-year-old boy, Sam, as collateral. "The police," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the swirling tea. "I went to them. They saw me, my clothes, they said it was a custody dispute. They told me to move along." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of casual cruelty, the way the world looked right through people it deemed worthless. As he listened, the weariness in his eyes was slowly replaced by a hard, metallic glint. It was a look that hadn't surfaced in 5 years, a look that had once made hardened men tremble. He had buried that man for Owen's sake, but the cries of a desperate mother were a powerful shovel. "I will get him back for you," he said. The words were quiet, but they held an absolute, unbreakable certainty. Nadia looked up, startled by the sheer conviction in his tone. For the first time, she truly saw him, not as a janitor in a worn jacket, but as an anchor in her storm. From a small table in the corner, Serafina watched the scene unfold. She had stopped for a late-night coffee to review some documents, but her attention was now fixed on the janitor from her building. She saw the raw desperation on the homeless woman's face and then heard Ethan's impossible promise. What was he thinking? He was a cleaner, a poor single father. Getting involved with a loan shark named Rico was a death sentence. Concern overriding her skepticism, she walked over to their table. "Ethan," she said softly. He looked up, and for a second, she was taken aback by the intensity in his eyes. It was like looking at a completely different person. "Are you all right?" "I couldn't help but overhear." "You should be careful. This is a matter for the authorities." Ethan's expression softened slightly at her genuine concern, but the resolve didn't waver. "The authorities have already failed her, Sarah," he said, his voice still low but carrying a new weight. "Sometimes, the only person you can count on is the one who is willing to step into the dark." He turned back to Nadia, his focus absolute. "Where does Rico operate?" Later that night, after settling Nadia in a cheap but safe motel room he paid for with his grocery money, Ethan returned to his own cramped apartment. The scent of cinnamon and the soft glow of a nightlight greeted him. He tiptoed into his son's room. Owen was asleep, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically, a picture of perfect innocence. "You're a hero, Daddy," Owen had mumbled sleepily when Ethan had tucked him in earlier. The memory was a fire in his chest. This was why he'd walked away. To protect this peace. But his promise to Nadia was a promise to Owen, too, a promise that the world, as dark as it was, still had people willing to fight for the innocent. He moved to the living room and knelt, prying up a loose floorboard beneath a threadbare rug. The space beneath didn't hold cash or sentimental keepsakes. It held his former life, condensed into a small, dust-covered box. Inside lay a sleek, matte black satellite phone, a set of titanium lockpicks, and a single, discreet earpiece. The dingy apartment, with its peeling paint and second-hand furniture, was a world away from the gleaming, deadly technology that now rested in his palm. He was breaking his own sacred rule. He was letting the ghost out. He powered on the satellite phone. It took a moment to acquire a signal, a digital handshake across continents to a world he had forsaken. He dialed a number he had committed to a memory he could never erase. It rang once before a crisp, professional voice answered. "This line is inactive, it's Ghost," Ethan said, the call sign feeling foreign on his tongue after so long. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a stunned silence. "Ghost. We thought you were dead." "I was," Ethan replied, his voice flat. "I need a ghost file. A local player. Name's Rico. Runs a loan sharking operation out of the industrial district." The professionalism snapped back into place, colored with a new, profound respect. "Consider it done. File incoming in 5 minutes." "It's good to hear your voice, sir." The word "sir" hung in the air after the call ended. It was a title from a life of command, of life and death decisions, a universe away from being called Daddy Daycare. The encrypted file arrived moments later, painting a detailed picture of Rico's operation, a warehouse on the waterfront, a crew of about 10 low-level thugs, and a predictable security rotation. Child's play. But the stakes were infinitely higher than any mission he had ever undertaken. Meanwhile, Serafina couldn't sleep. The image of Ethan's cold, determined eyes was seared into her mind. It didn't align with the quiet, beleaguered janitor she saw every day. Driven by a mix of worry and intense curiosity, she used her managerial access to remotely pull up Ethan's employee file. It was a digital ghost. His name was Ethan, he had a son named Owen, and he had started working for the cleaning company 2 years ago. Before that, nothing. No previous employment history, no past addresses, no emergency contacts beyond a post office box. It was the kind of clean slate that screamed of a fabricated identity. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was a man who was intentionally invisible, a man hiding from something. Or someone. Her concern for him deepened, now mingled with a spark of fear and an undeniable intrigue. The next morning, Ethan arrived at work, his face a mask of weary resignation, but his mind was a whirlwind of tactical analysis. He was moving a mop through the third-floor hallway when Garrett cornered him, his face flushed with petty rage. "I heard you were playing hero last night with that street trash," Garrett spat, blocking his path. "You left your post early. You think the rules don't apply to you? You're on your final warning, Daddy Daycare." One more screw-up, and you and that kid of yours will be joining her on the street. To punctuate his threat, Garrett shoved Ethan hard against the wall. It was a stupid, brutish move, but it triggered something primal in Ethan. In a blur of motion too fast to properly see, Ethan's body reacted. His hand shot up, catching Garrett's wrist. His fingers found the precise pressure points, his body twisting with lethal economy. For a terrifying split second, Garrett felt his entire arm go numb, his wrist on the verge of snapping like a dry twig. He saw not the janitor, but a predator looking at him with eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. Then, just as quickly, Ethan released him, consciously pulling the monster back into its cage. He shoved Garrett away, a controlled move that sent the supervisor stumbling backward into a decorative ficus plant. Garrett stared, his face pale with shock and a dawning, animal fear. He had seen a flicker of something truly dangerous. From the end of the hall, Serafina witnessed the entire exchange. She saw the shove, but more importantly, she saw Ethan's response. It wasn't a clumsy reaction. It was a fluid, precise, and terrifyingly efficient maneuver. It was the movement of a man trained to disable, to hurt, to kill. All her doubts, all her skepticism, vanished. Her pity was replaced by a staggering realization: the man she thought needed protecting might just be the most capable person she had ever met. And he was heading straight into a storm. That night, the janitor's uniform was replaced by dark, functional clothing that allowed for silent movement. The weary slump in Ethan's shoulders was gone, replaced by the coiled readiness of a hunter. He moved through the rain-slick streets of the industrial district not as a resident, but as an infiltrator reclaiming his native territory. The warehouse loomed ahead, a rust-stained box of corrugated steel. To a normal person, it was a fortress. To Ethan, it was a puzzle box with a simple solution. He observed for precisely 7 minutes, memorizing the patrol route of the single, bored-looking guard outside. He noted the 3 security cameras, 2 of which had obvious blind spots. Amateurs. He slipped through the shadows, his footsteps making no sound on the wet asphalt. A pebble, expertly tossed, drew the guard's attention to the far side of the building. In that brief window, Ethan was at the side door. The lock was a standard commercial grade, and his picks made short work of it. It clicked open with a soft snick that was swallowed by the sound of the rain. He was inside. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and damp concrete. A group of 4 thugs sat around a folding table under a single bare bulb, their voices echoing in the cavernous space as they played a listless game of cards. Ethan melted into the deeper shadows cast by stacks of shipping crates, a ghost in their midst. He moved with a practiced fluidity, his senses on high alert. He heard their conversation, crude jokes interspersed with business. "Rico says the buyer's coming at dawn," one of them grumbled, throwing down a card. "Wants the kid ready to go. Can't believe the money people will pay." A cold dread washed over Ethan. This wasn't just about a debt. They were going to sell Sam. The timeline had just been moved up. There was no room for error. Following the low murmur of a television, he located the main office. The door was locked. He could hear the faint, frightened whimpers of a child from within. His heart ached for the boy, a mirror of his own Owen, and his resolve hardened into diamond. He bypassed the second lock as easily as the first and slipped the door open a silent inch. Sam was huddled in the corner, his small face streaked with tears, his eyes fixed on the cartoon playing on a small TV. He was terrified but, thankfully, physically unharmed. Ethan entered the room, closing the door behind him with a barely audible click. The boy flinched, his eyes growing wide with fear. Ethan immediately dropped to one knee, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Hey," he whispered, his voice the same gentle tone he used with Owen. "It's okay. I'm a friend of your mom's." "My name is Ethan," he offered a small, reassuring smile. "We're going to play a game. It's called Quiet as a Mouse. Can you do that for me? Can you be super quiet until we're outside?" Sam looked at him, his fear slowly being replaced by a flicker of hope. He gave a tiny, hesitant nod. Ethan scooped him up, the boy's small frame light in his arms. Sam buried his face in Ethan's shoulder, clinging to him like a lifeline. As Ethan stepped back into the main warehouse space, a floorboard creaked under his weight. One of the card players looked up, his eyes widening in alarm. "Hey! Who the hell are you?" The game was over. The hunt was on. The alarm was raised with a shout, and the warehouse erupted into chaos. The thugs, clumsy and slow, grabbed for makeshift weapons, pipes, wrenches, their own fists. They saw a lone man holding a child, an easy target. It was a fatal miscalculation. The moment they moved on him, Ethan was no longer Ethan, the janitor. He was Ghost. He moved with a brutal, balletic grace that was terrifying to behold. He placed Sam gently behind a large crate, whispering, "Stay here. Close your eyes." The first man swung a heavy pipe. Ethan sidestepped the clumsy attack, using the man's own momentum to guide him into a wall. A single, precise strike to the back of the neck, and the man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Two more rushed him from either side. Ethan flowed between them like water, deflecting a punch, redirecting an arm, and using a series of swift, disabling joint locks and pressure point strikes. They collapsed in succession, groaning in pain but not permanently injured. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, his movements economical and devastatingly effective. He wasn't just fighting, he was deconstructing them, taking them apart piece by piece with the cold precision of a master surgeon. The remaining thugs froze, their bravado evaporating into raw fear. They were looking at something they couldn't comprehend. Just then, a heavy door at the back of the warehouse burst open. Rico, a portly man with cruel, piggy eyes, stood there, a revolver in his hand. "Drop the kid and put your hands up," he bellowed, his voice trying for authority but trembling with rage. Ethan stood perfectly still, shielding Sam's hiding place with his body. He met Rico's gaze, and his eyes were devoid of all emotion save for a chilling, righteous fury. "You don't touch children," Ethan said, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate in the very air. Rico laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I do whatever I want. Now, I'm gonna." He never finished the sentence. In the time it took Rico to blink, Ethan closed the 15 feet between them. He moved like a phantom, a blur of silent speed. He slapped the gun aside, the deafening roar of its discharge echoing harmlessly as the bullet tore into the ceiling. In the same fluid motion, he shattered Rico's wrist, forcing the gun from his grasp. A knee to the solar plexus drove the air from Rico's lungs, and a final, calculated blow sent him crashing to the concrete floor, gasping and broken. Ethan stood over him, a dark angel of retribution. He picked up Rico's phone, dialed the emergency services, and left it by the whimpering loan shark's head. "There's been an incident at the waterfront warehouse," he said in a disguised, anonymous voice. "Multiple injuries. Suspects are armed. Send everyone." He then retrieved Sam, who had wisely kept his eyes shut tight. "The game's over," he whispered gently. "You won." He carried the boy out into the cleansing rain, leaving a scene of silent, incapacitated bodies for the authorities to find. The reunion with Nadia outside the motel was a torrent of relieved sobs and grateful tears. She hugged her son so tightly it seemed she might never let go. She then turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with awe and disbelief. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked down at the small boy now clinging to his mother's leg, and a genuine, weary smile touched his lips. "I'm just a dad," he said. "Just a dad who keeps his promises." He retreated into the shadows, making one last call on the satellite phone. "Ghost. The package is secure. Rico's operation was a front for human trafficking. The evidence is on his phone. Clean it up. Make sure my name is nowhere near this." "Understood," the voice replied. "Welcome back, sir." He walked home through the pre-dawn quiet, the adrenaline slowly leaving his system, replaced by a profound exhaustion. As he approached his apartment building, he saw a figure waiting by the entrance. It was Serafina. She was holding a tablet, the screen glowing with a news alert about a massive police raid on a warehouse. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. She looked from the news report to him, at his rain-soaked clothes and the fresh scratch on his cheek. She put all the pieces together, the promise in the coffee shop, his file, the terrifying speed he'd shown with Garrett, and now this. "I don't know who you are, Ethan," she said, her voice a mix of fear and wonder. "But I know you saved that little boy. And I know you're a good man." For the first time in 5 years, he let the mask fall away completely. The weight of his secrets, of his solitude, was crushing him. "I left that life behind," he said, his voice raw with a pain she was only just beginning to understand. "To protect my son. I just wanted to be a normal father. The vulnerability in his admission broke through her shock, touching something deep within her. She saw past the ghost, past the operator, and saw the man, the devoted father willing to do anything to shield his child from the darkness he knew so well. Without a word, she stepped forward and took his hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. In her eyes, he didn't see pity or fear. He saw acceptance. The following day, the atmosphere at work was thick with unspoken tension. News of the warehouse raid was everywhere, and Garrett kept shooting Ethan suspicious, fearful glances. His bravado, however, quickly returned, fueled by his need to reassert his pathetic dominance. He cornered Ethan by the elevators, in front of Serafina and a dozen other employees. "That's it, Daddy Daycare. You're finished," he declared, his voice booming with false confidence. "You're a liability, a troublemaker, and you're fired. Pack up your mops and get out." Ethan didn't even flinch. He just looked at Garrett with a calm, almost pitying expression. As Garrett preened, enjoying his moment of power, a fleet of sleek, black sedans pulled up to the building's entrance with impossible silence. The lead car's door opened, and a man in a flawlessly tailored suit emerged. He moved with an air of quiet authority that made everyone, including the building's security, stand a little straighter. The man walked directly into the lobby, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Ethan. He approached the janitor, stopping a respectful distance away and giving a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head. "Sir," the man said, his voice clear and resonant. "The asset has been liquidated. The trafficking ring has been dismantled by federal agents. Your anonymity is secure." As requested, a collective gasp went through the lobby. Garrett's jaw dropped, his face turning a blotchy, horrified shade of red. He stared from the impeccably dressed man to the janitor he had just fired. The man in the suit then presented Ethan with a slim, leather-bound folder. "Furthermore, the board has completed its search. We've been looking for you for a very long time, Mr. Sterling. Your father's seat as CEO of Sterling Conglomerate is waiting for you." Sterling Conglomerate, the multinational corporation that owned this very building. The company whose toilets Ethan had been scrubbing. The pieces clicked into place with an audible thud in the minds of everyone present. Ethan wasn't just a janitor in hiding, he was the prodigal son, the lost heir to a global empire. He had been hiding in the one place no one would ever think to look, at the very bottom of his own company. Ethan took the folder, his expression unreadable. He glanced at its contents, then looked up at Garrett, whose face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Ethan turned back to the suited man. "My first order of business," he said, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Fire him." The man nodded once. "Consider it done, sir." Ethan then turned his gaze to Serafina. She was smiling, a radiant, beautiful smile that held no surprise, only pride and a deep, burgeoning affection. He walked over to her and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Just then, the lobby doors opened again. A friend of Ethan's, who had been watching Owen, led the little boy inside for a planned surprise lunch. Owen's face lit up. "Daddy," he yelled, running into Ethan's arms. Ethan effortlessly scooped him up, holding his son close. The world had just been turned upside down, but in that moment, with his son in his arms and Serafina by his side, everything was perfectly in its right place. He was no longer a ghost, no longer just a janitor. He was Ethan Sterling, a father and a protector, finally ready to build a new life from the ashes of the old. So, the next time you see someone the world has written off, the single parent working 2 jobs, the person cleaning up the messes others leave behind, take a closer look. Ask yourself, what hidden power lies within them? What battles are they fighting that you can't see? Share in the comments if you believe in the hidden strengths of everyday heroes, because sometimes, the janitor isn't just a janitor. He's a king waiting to reclaim his throne.